Intimacy, page 99. As part of this psycho-emotional numbing category, talking about World War II, Cold War, our fears, collective fears, horror movies, reinforcing our slumber, a shock that a nightmare could deliver, the shock that could jolt us awake and propel us into life-enhancing action. Sometimes we settle for the chills and thrills and eventual relief afforded by our immersion in second-hand fears. We may have the best seats in the coziest section of the ecological and political nightmare that infests our planet, and we may have more than enough comfort and status to relegate this to the outskirts of our consciousness. But there fear resides, gnawing at our gates, sliding under our doors, finding more and more ways to get to us. In our heart of hearts, we know we must face this nightmare with our whole being. It may be very late to start taking such a stand, but take it we must, doing our very best to align ourselves with it. This begins with seeing collective fear for what it is and learning to recognize when we are susceptible to it, such as when we are feeling overwhelmed by various demands and we let ourselves spin off into the kind of functioning that only makes things worse. None of us are immune to collective fear, so let us turn to face it with as little numbing as we can. Our solutions to collective fear. Numbing ourselves is not our only solution to collective fear. Another is avoidance, which overlaps with numbing. Collective fear insinuates its way into us, emotionally, psychologically, physically, electronically, and we may find ourselves sidestepping it, rising above it, withdrawing from it, and dissociating from it as much as we can. Whereas numbing is a freezing or congealing, avoidance is flight. So there's more movement in avoidance. It chooses not inertia but removal. Its legs do not turn leaden in a nightmare, but rather to wings, whatever helps us get away. For example, instead of numbly reading about a local tragedy, we shut ourselves off from any incoming information, refusing to learn or talk about it. Aggression is another solution to collective fear. Instead of fleeing or freezing, we fight. We transmute the energy of fear into the energy of unhealthy anger. Anger that is out to attack. Now we're not afraid, but pissed off and looking for someone or something to go after aggressively. However, we're still not relating to our fear, but are, as is the case with freezing and fleeing, only relating from it. Moving not into healthy anger, non-blaming, non-shaming, non-attacking anger, but into modes in which offending others becomes our focus. Righteously targeting them and all their shortcomings, those damn politicians, distracts us from the very fear that is motivating us to behave with aggression in the first place. The fourth F, the first three solutions being fleeing, fighting, and freezing, is obsession with sexuality. In laboratory studies, the more afraid an overcrowded collection of rats is, the more hypersexual and sexually abhorrent they become. Humans are similar. Under stress, we may overuse sex to provide a quick, potent, energetic release from tension, or to act out our unresolved wounds and unmet needs. As collective fear spreads wider and deeper, so does the reliance on sex as a means of making us feel better or more secure. Modern culture is so hypersexualized, so obsessively eroticized. Is there a more ubiquitous adjective than sexy? That we generally treat such excess as all but normal. We are acclimatized to it. There's often the promise of a certain liberating power in sex, however crude, and that promise becomes especially seductive and magnetically appealing when collective fear grips us. But only when we release sex and everything else from the obligation to make us feel better, or at least less fearful, do we really start to free ourselves. If only to at last face our fear both in its personal and collective forms. For me, collective fear is. I'm most aware of collective fear when my usual way of dealing with collective fear is how this is similar to my usual way of dealing with my own fear is what scares me most about our ecological and political situation is as I feel this, my guts are. As I feel this, my heart is. If my heart could speak right now, it would say, my breathing feels. My usual way of numbing myself is. What scares me the most about not numbing myself is what happens to my suffering when I let myself openly feel the suffering of others is. What happens to my fear when I let myself openly feel the fear of others is. When I stop trying to get away from collective fear, what happens is the edge that humankind is fast approaching is.